everyone. My name is Caitlin Bauer. I am Sterling's social media manager. Welcome to another week, another episode of Sterling Live. We do this every Tuesday at 1 p.m. Eastern across LinkedIn, YouTube, and Facebook. So we're super happy to have you guys here watching us today, but also please come visit us every Tuesday at 1 p.m. Eastern. So I'm super excited to have Taylor Liggett here with me today. He is our general manager of Sterling Identity. And today we're going to be talking about insider secrets, getting the most out of your background checks, and the role of identity. So welcome, Taylor. Can you please introduce yourself to our audience?
Yeah, hi, Caitlin. Thanks so much for having me. So my name is Taylor Liggett, and I am the general manager of Sterling Identity. Really happy to be here today and talk to you about this case.
Awesome. Thank you so much. So to get started, as we do talk about background checks, the role of identity services, can we start off with an overview of Sterling Identity?
Yeah, absolutely. So Sterling Identity is Sterling's wing that essentially handles all things identity as well as biometrics. And Sterling Identity actually started as Sure ID. So we have a rich history in this space, and originally started as one of the first FBI channelers. Did a lot of work actually with the military, with the government in terms of vetting and properly identifying people. And then in late 2017, early 2018, we were acquired by Sterling. And it was really to bring a new focus within the space of biometrics and identity throughout the Sterling customer base. And that's really evolved over the last few years. And in 2019, we rebranded as Sterling Identity and really leaned in to lead the industry within identity verification, biometrics, and some of these emerging technologies.
That's great, and probably a super helpful overview for our audience right now. So I'm going to take a bit of a step back real quick and just invite our audience at any time, if you have questions for Taylor, please feel free to ask them, comment across Facebook, LinkedIn, and YouTube, and I'll go ahead and get those questions in front of Taylor. So before we dive into, the topic in a lot of detail, I want to give our audience a little background on some keywords and phrases around identity. So first and foremost, identity verification. Can you provide us with a brief description of that?
Yeah, absolutely. So identity verification is really with and hang on one second. I'm just making sure my mic is correct. I just got some feedback about my mic. Give me just one moment here.
You do sound perfect right now. What
I do?
hear. So,
okay.
Yep.
Great.
Yep.
Okay, wonderful. Okay, so background about identity verification. Absolutely. So I think one of the things that gets us just really excited about what we're doing is that when you think within the space of background screening or really employee hiring, identity verification is not something that's really ever been front and center at the start of the process. So the easiest way that I always look to explain this is that if you think about it, it's kind of crazy that in the year 2020, most employers still in a space where they will interview someone, they will hire someone, and then it's not until after that entire process that someone's ID is looked at. And we really look at a means of wanting to move that up front in the process and help make sure that we know who we're hiring, and also for the purposes of background checks. It's not just also about making sure that Taylor Liggett is Taylor Liggett. It's making sure that my information is accurate, that my date of birth is accurate, my full name, etc., so that background screens and all the sort of downstream things we do are handled appropriately and not impacted by bad data or in the worst case, by a fraudulent actor.
Yeah, so that's a great overview of, identity, as a whole, but looking into, methods. So there's in-person, biometrics, knowledge-based authentication, electronic. Can you give us some, examples for each of those areas, or just provide a little bit more detail for our audience?
Sure. So identity verification, to your point, Caitlin, there's a broad spectrum of tools that are out there. And that's really one of the things that Sterling and Sterling Identity are working to do is to create an identity stack that has all of these different solutions in an easily accessible way for our customers, because different identity verification solutions make sense in different areas. And there are also different things you need to do to meet various compliance or regulations that are around the world, right? So some of the most common ones, obviously in-person is probably at the top of that list. I think historically, we've always looked at in-person verification as kind of the gold standard. I would argue it's not, but it's certainly one means of being able to verify someone's identity. Biometrics, clearly an emerging space. There's everything from a fingerprint that could be used to face, to iris, voice, etc. that can be used. I think the two that we see certainly the most of are fingerprinting and facial recognition. Facial recognition is being used more and more.
Very popular right now.
And then I think, some of the other areas, you mentioned knowledge-based authentication or electronic identity verification. There are ways that you can, share with people certain information only they should know. Right. So, on what street was your first mortgage, or what was the make and model of your first car, those type things, as a means of confirming your identity. And then there's a number of emerging ways using geolocation services and phone SIM checks and a number of different things that are coming out that can also help with this.
Yeah. Thank you for that. Very, very helpful, trying to understand, identity verification as a whole, but then the methods. There's so many different ways that this can be attained. So it's very interesting to dive deep down into all of them and really understand, how organizations are looking at this and being able to identify future employees. So I think that's great. So let's talk a little bit about the importance of identity verification. So why is a product, a service like identity verification important right now?
Yeah, so I got into this a little bit at the start, and just talking about how making sure that you know who someone is hiring, who someone is that you're hiring, right?
Yeah.
Right, is important. But I think just to crystallize the 2 points, as I distill this down, one is background checks do not necessarily by default verify candidate identity. And I just think that's something that a lot of folks don't know or take for granted. There are elements that sort of get into this, but certainly it is not a common constant check to verify identity at the start of the background screen. So that's one reason why we view it as really important to make sure we know who we're screening, make sure we know who we're hiring, and get that background screen correct. But also, obviously the world we live in 2020 is different than it has been before. We had already seen a shift towards remote hiring, towards everything that kind of came with that. And now that is, the foot has been put on the gas, to say the least. And we are seeing more and more companies take either a virtual first or a fully remote type approach. And so in this new world, we need to make sure even more, as we're hiring people who aren't coming into a physical location, that we know, who we're hiring, who we're screening, who we're sending equipment to, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah. So something that's interesting that I found super interesting when I started working at Sterling and really understanding, our identity side of things, is that when you're looking at it from a global perspective, the US actually doesn't have as much traction in this area, compared to the UK, Canada, the APAC region. So as we look at it from a global standpoint, why is it that identity hasn't had the same traction in the US compared to those other areas, as an example?
Yeah, so it's one of the most fascinating topics, because I think the US has done a great job of really, in my opinion, leading in terms of background screening. I think that the overall foundation and framework that we have in place in the States as it relates to background screening is incredibly strong. With identity verification, not so much.
Right.
And, my take on this is that I think other countries have done a really good job of making sure, you mentioned a few, Canada, UK, Australia, having actual regulation that states that to run a criminal check, you need to verify the identity of the person. That is not something that exists in the United States. Okay. And I think part of it is, our I-9 process has largely been used as the means to verify somebody's identity. And that happens after someone's hired. Yeah. And so that's part of the shift we're trying to create here, is to bring that farther up front. I don't expect there to be any forcing regulation at any point soon within the United States, at least that we've seen. But I do think from a best practice standpoint, we can enable this in a way that all of our clients can benefit from having it be farther upstream as part of just the normal standard kind of hiring and background screening process. But it is very interesting that we're behind where a lot of countries are.
Do you see the like the process maybe speeding up a bit? Because you brought up I-9, you brought up remote hiring before, and obviously that I-9 process has, been a little bit more flexible remotely now. So do you see that speeding up the verification process or anything that we're putting into place right now, or does that not really like play into it?
Well, I think eventually all of this comes together. I think what is helping us get there right now is that there are technology advances that are easing the burden of checking identity. So, like as an example, if we talk about Canada and the UK again as a parallel, historically a lot of the processes have been going in person to say Canada Post or UK Post. That is a burdensome, very friction-filled candidate journey, and now that we have tools that can, for example, capture someone's government issued ID and verify if it is genuine or not, take a picture of someone and use facial recognition to make sure they match that ID. Some of the other tools that I was mentioning, you can really streamline this in a way you haven't been able to do before. We've just released some tools in Canada and the UK to help with kind of their respective processes. We've done a lot within the States. As it relates to I-9, currently, there is still that in-person requirement that exists with I-9. To your point, USIS has relaxed that during COVID, or at least extended the ability for employers to not have to do that during this time and to kind of catch up later. But we're very interested in working towards permanent solutions that long-term can help employers meet not just identity verification, but I-9 in a more streamlined, upfront, technology first way.
Right. So you touched a little bit upon the UK and Canada, but can you provide other details or detail out how they are more advanced than the US right now? What does identity verification look like in those regions?
Yeah, and to be clear, I don't think I'd say more advanced necessarily. I think they're farther along. I think it is more ingrained within their hiring and background screening processes. So just to speak to Canada for a moment, historically, the way that it's worked is if you're going to get a background screen and be criminally checked, you go through an electronic identity verification process, or EIV, which in the States we tend to know as KBA, and it's again where you be asked questions only you should know. But only about 60% of people were able to go through that. About 40% fell out for one reason or another. So then those individuals would have to go to Canada Post as a means of verifying their identity and completing the process. We've just actually just a couple weeks ago released a new product that uses some of the technology I was speaking about, being able to further automate that, verify someone's ID is genuine, verify they're presenting that. So that can now be used as the fallback to avoid someone having to go into Canada Post. And similarly within the UK, there's a right to work requirement. We've just released some technology that will really streamline that and allow for that same type of document verification and so on to also be used there. So I think it was easier to introduce some of this into markets that were familiar with identity verification and to where employers and the government kind of recognize this as a part of the process. Whereas in the States, what we're going through is not just the right workflows and the right technology and the right sort of identity verification for the right clients, but it's also just an entire education process about what happens today, what doesn't happen today, and why identity verification is important and should be happening farther up front.
Are you seeing similarities in the UK as well? Or are they different in other areas, other aspects of it?
No, I mean, I think they're certainly similar. As I mentioned, having the right to work requirement, having the need to kind of go into the UK Post. There's both existing identity verification that takes place and also a significant amount of opportunity that continues to be how we can, streamline that and provide better solutions with less friction to our customers.
That's great. So looking into things like identity theft, fraud, we're seeing that it is on the rise, and that is leading to a lot of issues with identity for a lot of people. So would you be able to provide us with like particular scenarios where that's affected an organization, an individual, things like that?
Yeah, absolutely. It's been a very interesting journey as we've started out with the, kind of with the perspective that identity should be the foundation of hiring and background screening. I'll be honest, I think there's a lot of employers we talked to initially who, come on, am I really having candidates pretending to be someone else? And I think what we found is, yes, that is happening more than we frankly have even thought that it was. And additionally, there's a whole ton of middle ground where someone is, technically they're John Smith or what have you. They've thrown off their middle name, or they've thrown off their date of birth because they're a savvy criminal that knows how to sort of skirt through some of the guardrails that are in place for screening. And so what we've seen is, just to name a couple of examples, we work with a relatively large kind of retail staffing organization that places people into sales positions. We've implemented some identity verification with them upfront in the process, and have found a surprising amount of just outright identity fraud. People who are completely pretending to be someone else for the purposes of defrauding them, stealing expensive equipment, etc. And the implementation of this process has shined a bright light on what was previously a real gap. Within there. So you have things that I think are sort of on that extreme of just outright identity fraud. But then also, we work with customers who have had people slip through who either accidentally gave misinformation or mistyped some information about them, or purposely did it. We've had cases that are horrific of people sort of skirting through the process that were experienced fraudsters and knew what to throw off. So those are all of the things that we're both identifying and really working to help clients with. I mean, I think if we're honest about this and really just look at this objectively, a background screen outside of a fingerprint-based FBI check is entirely predicated on the information you provide.
Right.
So there needs to be processes in place to make sure that information is accurate prior to running the background check.
So when working with clients, we do share this a lot, whether it's on our Sterling Live series or within our content on the website. We are frequently talking about how we're partnering with clients and providing them best practice and guidance. So when it comes to identity, what is that top piece of advice or that top, guidance factor that you guys are providing when it comes to identity when working with clients?
Yeah, look, the number one thing we're helping clients to understand is that identity is important, and everything you're doing with hiring employees and background screening should start with identity. I think that is just foundationally where we're at. But it's also really reflecting on your own processes. I mean, some employers obviously are better at this than others and have processes in place where they double check information and make sure that information is accurate before it gets within their systems. Others don't. Others, may think they're doing it through the background screening provider and not realize that they aren't. So it's an education about making sure that you sort of do your own internal audit of what your processes are, where gaps and where vulnerabilities exist. That's the easiest way to explain it, is don't have identity be a vulnerability within background screening or any part of your hiring process. And then it's really being consultative, with clients and helping them understand what options exist within this space and what may work best within their own workflow.
Yeah, and that's great. And as we've been discussing, for the past 20 minutes or so, there are many options. There is a lot of stuff to discuss. So I think that is great that, again, another area of Sterling where we are acting as partners and providing, the best guidance we can to bring organizations to the next level. And most importantly, keep these organizations safe. So speaking again, more so about clients and things that Sterling's up to, can we dive a little bit into our identity launch in the US? And can you, provide a little bit of detail of how this is going to be integrated into our background screening solution? This is very exciting, by the way.
Yeah. Absolutely. Well, I am certainly excited myself about it. It's been, a lot of work has gone into this. A lot of work will continue to go into this. Yeah, so we have an identity solution available right now that is available through API and with some of our select direct customers that we've been rolling this out with. It's really focused around document verification and facial recognition, or using selfie to make sure that the person matches the document that they're presenting. But we do have a full kind of identity stack that incorporates other tools and other options for clients who may be interested in what those look like. And I think where we're going with this is to have a full integration within our candidate hub system, right? So that candidates, as they're coming into the system, have the ability to have some different options in making sure that information is accurate, biographic information is accurate, that they're portraying, and that they are who they say they are. So having that integration kind of built in, and then also just workflows that surround that give a number of different options. I think that's the difference with what Sterling's doing in bringing this to market. Frankly, it is relatively easy to take some of this technology and just build it into a process. That's not the hard part. We have that right now. The hard part is making sure that the workflows and the compliance surrounding this are all buttoned up in a way that work in the real world, right? So just as an example, the technology I've talked about a couple times of using a mobile phone to verify a document, it's great. It works the vast majority of the time. It doesn't work all the time. Perhaps someone's phone is broken. Perhaps someone's barcode on the back of their ID is ripped off. What do you do in those situations? How do clients handle it when somebody is outright fraudulent? What dispute processes exist with these things? What other sort of off-ramps can you offer so that somebody can go through additional processes in line with this? That's really where a lot of the work right now is being focused within our US launch, to make sure that clients have some options and have best practices and workflows that will really allow them to successfully incorporate identity into all of their hiring. So we're very excited as we're continuing to work on this.
Again, no, agreed. It's definitely very exciting. And I love hearing more and more about it each day. So this is it just adds on to the excitement, this episode of Sterling Live right here. So we're talking a lot about, clients, organizations, things like that. Can you give us a little bit of, a deeper dive into what the candidate process looks like and what, how they go through everything? So just to look into a view from a candidate's perspective.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think if we take at least the main tool I've been talking about a lot today with the document verification, it's very simple for a candidate. There's actually a demo as well that's on our website that anyone can go to and run through. It takes a couple minutes. I think the easiest way that I would explain is think about how you deposit a mobile check. I think the vast majority of people are familiar with that. Very similar technology in play here. So a candidate would receive a request. They have their mobile phone, take out a government issued ID, put that on a desk, take a photo of that ID, front and back if it's a driver's license, just the front if it's a passport. Essentially, the system can verify then if that is a real ID. And then the individual would typically turn into selfie mode, take a picture of themselves. We do facial recognition to match it to that. All in all, the process is most of the time near real time, very quick, and the candidate just completes that and then goes on within the candidate journey.
Good. Sounds pretty seamless, easy for the candidate. So it's good. That's good to hear. No, but thank you for walking through that. Very, very helpful for sure. So looking into the future, where do you see that the identity space is headed?
Yeah, it's certainly, Caitlin, the reason why I love my job so much and sort of love this space is because identity is a very, very fast moving space right now. And I think what we've seen in terms of progress just within the last year or two has been really extraordinary. How fast things are moving, how fast the adoption of some of this new technology is, how fast the development is of even more next generation technology. I see things moving. Technology will continue to improve. New ways of verifying identity will continue to be created. I think that largely goes without saying. Where I get very interested is when all of this starts to come together in a way where people's identity doesn't have to be re-verified every time. Right. So like your identity doesn't change, it's just a matter of making sure that the right framework is in place so that when we verify your identity, you're given the type of tool that can allow you to reassert that. So just as an example, you go through, and you're hired by Acme Corp, and you get screened by Sterling, and you go through a type of process like I explained, where you log into Candidate Hub, and you go through a comprehensive identity verification process. We vet out and make sure all of your information is accurate, and you I think should be given an opportunity to essentially save that, right? And make that portable in a sense, so that the next time that you're hired by, XYZ corporation and you go through a Sterling background check, you don't have to repeat that. You simply can log in and, hey, we know this is Caitlin, and let's go ahead and just start the process at that point. I think that's the next big evolution in identity that we'll see, is portable identity, and then it can get really exciting, because where does it stop, right? If we can prove identity, what's to say we can't take other immutable aspects, tie them to you as well. Things like your address history doesn't change, things like your education, etc. That's where I'm very interested to watch, and very interested to help lead as we move forward.
It's very interesting for sure. And again, like conversations like this, or else like learning from any blogs that we put out there, any webinars that we do, it's always interesting to see where the space is, where Sterling is, and where it is going in the future. So I do appreciate your insight on the future, because I do think that's very interesting, and I'd love to see it get there sooner rather than later. So speaking of the future, we're seeing that the hiring landscape is just, consistently changing all the time. And excitingly enough, on October 21st, it is a Wednesday, in partnership with HR.com, we're hosting a webcast called The Changing Hiring Landscape, How Identity and Technology Can Speed Up Background Checks. So Taylor, you're hosting this with our CHRO, Daniel Corrins. Can you provide some detail on this webinar?
Yeah, I appreciate you bringing it up. I mean, it's essentially a continuation of a lot of the conversation that we've been having today. What we did, though, is we've been trying a number of different methods of engaging with employers that are out there. So, all of the Sterling client advisory boards and various meetings, we've been introducing a lot of this, but we also wanted to partner with HR.com to kind of survey a lot of organizations and really ask them, what identity verification processes, if any, do you have in place right now? What would you like to see? How many of you are doing this prior to the I-9 requirement, et cetera? And we got a lot of great data back, and it sort of helped us quantify a lot of what our initial assumptions were, validate rather what a lot of our initial assumptions were. And so we're going to get on and kind of go over this data, share with the employers kind of what largely is being seen out there, and have a chance to just further talk about how we're putting this all together in a way that I think employers can start to change their minds and introduce new processes.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to that webcast for sure, and I hope you all are as well. After today's live show, we will put the registration link in the comment section across Facebook, LinkedIn, and YouTube, so you all will have a chance to register, and we definitely hope that we can see you on Wednesday, the 21st. So I'm going to take a second here. And if anyone who's watching has any questions for Taylor, now's a great time to ask. But as we sit and wait for any potential questions that come in, are there any final thoughts that you have for our audience today?
I appreciate the time. I hope everyone found this session to be valuable. I love talking about identity. I think that it's something that we all almost kind of take for granted how bad the system is right now, that we all, in just generally in terms of identity, not necessarily even with background screening. If you think about the hundreds of passwords we have and the constant ways in which we're needing to reassert we are who we are, prove we are who we are, and the ways in which this is so foundational to screening, hiring, and just society in general, I'm very interested to see how things continue to evolve, and excited to be even just a small part of that. So
absolutely,
we love engagement from customers, whether throughout this or alternatively, we'd encourage folks to reach out and share with us their experiences and ask how we can help.
Absolutely. So at this time, we don't have any questions. But if anyone watching, you do have questions in the future for Taylor, for me, for anyone else at Sterling, you can always reach out to us on our social media platforms. You can also visit sterlingcheck.com, reach out to us via the web. But yeah, again, Taylor, thank you so much for joining today. I know you love talking about identity, but I loved sitting down with you today and talking about it. It was super interesting for me. A lot of exciting stuff coming out, but thank you. And thank you to our audience for joining us.
Thanks, Caitlin. Really appreciate you having me on today.
Absolutely. And I look forward to seeing everyone next Tuesday at 1 p.m. Eastern again. So thank you all again.
Thanks.